Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all excellent. I've got the Boss RC500 right here, and a warning, this is going to be a long video. It is mostly going to be a tutorial covering all the kind of things you can actually do with this and deep diving into some of its functionality, because believe me, you can do a lot. But basically, for me, this is one of the most useful pieces of gear I've ever come across, especially in this apocalyptic year of 2020, because before the whole COVID shutdown thing, I was doing a lot of acoustic gigs where basically venues want the sound of a full band, but they don't want a full band. And doing an acoustic gig and like playing along to a pre-made backing track is pretty lame. So the kind of solution was to have this big pedal board with a looper pedal, some kind of drum trigger or drum machine or rhythm thing that always sounded okay going into the looper, octave pedals, acoustic guitars, just a whole bunch of stuff. And it was really hard to get it all to sync up. So this solves a lot of problems straight out because it has 2 tracks, it has an input for a microphone, it has stereo ins, stereo outs. If you want to have the inbuilt drum machine, which sounds really good, by the way, go to its own output, and your instruments go to their own output. You can do that. If you want them coming out of both outputs, you can do that. If you want these buttons to do things that they don't say on the case, you can do that. If you want to use MIDI via the MIDI TRS jacks, you can do that. You can hook up an expression pedal or external control switches and get more buttons out of this thing. This does so much, but this is probably the main way I'm going to be using this pedal, playing this kind of stuff. I'm using the Boss OC5 to do the low octaves. Everything else is coming from the RC500. Check it out. So that's like a vanilla single track example. You can obviously have 2 tracks and you can cascade them in series. You can run them in parallel. It can be one on, one off. Use them as parts. You can load up your own wave files onto this. For example, if you want to use this as a backing track player and, send a track to front of house and send a click to the drummer, you can do that. If you're somebody doing clinics or you're somebody who just wants to go out and busk, this would be awesome because you can load it up with backing tracks. It's got a mic input, like I said. We're going to get into this in a second, but I want you to hear this with electric guitar as well. And what I'm doing is I'm using my Poly Effects digit to basically turn the drum machine on and off and to turn the snare part of the drum machine on and off. You're also going to hear some loop effects like you heard at the end of the previous part. This is pretty awesome as well, and I've been having a lot of fun using it in this way with my Axe effects, sending the drum machine to a separate output, compressing it, EQing it, sending the other stuff to different inputs on my Axe effects and processing them. So we're going to hear a little jam. I'm going to get into it and make a bunch of faces. Then we're going to get into a tutorial and see how deep we can dive with this thing. Let's go. If you've ever used a looper pedal before, the RC500 is going to seem pretty familiar, especially if you've used a Boss looper pedal before. So we have our sliders for our 2 track volumes. We can also get in and edit deep parameters about the particular tracks and how they're set up to record and play back. There are a bunch of functions accessible using these switches here as well, which we'll talk about, including the rhythm function and things like the assign function. We can select our different memories using this knob here, and then we've got a volume for our microphone preamp. Like I said, we're going to dive into the deep functions in a little bit, but the way this unit comes out of the box is exactly the way these switches are labeled. So we have record and play, we've got stop. If you hold down stop, it will clear the track that you've selected, and then we've got a track select button here, and as you can see, these little LEDs will blink depending on which track we have selected. Now, the really powerful thing, like I said, is we can actually assign these to do whatever we want. You know, if we want to activate the drum machine with this, if we want to just use this as 2 parallel loops, if we want to cascade the loops, we can do that. If we want to have the rhythm come out of output A and the loops out of output B, you can do that. It's pretty amazing, but let's just basically use it at the factory settings, and I'll show you how to record a 2-track loop. I'm actually using another looper to play this in because this is on my desk, not at my feet. Either that or I have really weird toes. But let's just record a quick little loop on track number 1, and then I'll dub some other stuff on track 2, and I'll just kind of flip-flop and have a little jam on there. Let's do that. So basic operation is pretty straightforward. What I'm going to do next is use the little thing we recorded on track 1. I'm going to hit edit over here, and we can explore some of the functions like the loop effects or the reverse function. So let's hear the reverse function in action. I can scroll between different functions with the memory knob, and then I can actually press it to access the little sub menu there. Let's hear that. So that's a whole lot of fun. If I then go to the memory menu over here, what I can do is I can scroll over to loop effects, and then we have a whole suite of different effects. Now, you could assign these either via MIDI or to a control switch, or of course to one of the onboard switches. We'll look at how to do that in a second. But if we scroll over here, we can take a look at the different effects. There's a couple of different scatter effects. There are a few different repeat effects, which are kind of glitchy things. We've got shifts, which are really fun. And I think the one that's going to appeal to most people is the vinyl flick. So what I'll do is I'm just going to play through there. I'll give you a demo of the vinyl flick, the scatter, and some of the repeat effects. This is kind of cool because these almost sound like electronic music production effects or like DJ style effects rather than just generic guitar style, like, you know, chorus, delay, things that may not work in an actual live looping kind of context. So let's check that out. We'll start with the vinyl flick, of course. that's an amazing amount of fun. You can hear something like the scatter effect is actually really, really useful. The vinyl flick, of course, is probably going to be the thing this becomes associated with, because so many of us are just going to attach a control pedal there, and when we're live looping at the end of a song, give it that vinyl flick. But I like the scatter for those kind of rhythmic effects. I might just play something and then leave that on and just kind of noodle over it for a second. And you can see when you do have those effects on, it will come up with a message basically telling you, hey, you can't record anything over this at the time. Let's take a look at the rhythm function. We can engage it manually by pressing the on-off button here. We can also set the tempo. A really cool thing with the RC500 as well is that it can time stretch loops as well. So I've got two little pre-prepared loops over here. Let's just turn the rhythm on and have a listen to one of the stock kits. I'll then play around with the loops and some of the kits and show off the parts function, which will let you enable or disable different parts of the kit. Then we'll play around with some of the loop effects on all of that, because I think this is really, really creative and actually sounds really good. And some of the stock kits sound fantastic. Like I said earlier, we can go into the input options as well, and we can set things like the phantom power for the mic. We can assign where the mic in or the instrument in is routed, so we can have it going through, say, both outputs or inputs, or just one of those, or be totally off as well if you need that. Furthermore, you can set the rhythm track to come out of both or just a single output. So this is really handy because I can see a situation where, say you were doing a live gig and you needed the rhythm tracks, you could send those separately to their own mixer channel, send your loops to a different mixer channel, and then you can adjust on the fly, or whoever's doing sound can kind of mix each of those without it being preset on the particular pedal. We can also cycle through a few different options like the input sensitivity and the peak source on there as well. So throughout all of this, you've seen me just playing around with the pedals and changing things like the kits or the loop effects or the reverse function. Basically any function in here can be controlled via MIDI or via one of the onboard switches or an external control switch. So I'll show you how to do that really quickly. Let's hit memory, and we want to move over from record to the control over here. So this will set pedal 1, pedal 2, and pedal 3's function. As you can see, pedal 3's track select by default. We've got stop and clear on 2, and we've got record and play, but we can set that to be whatever we like. I'll give you an example of that. Let's make, say, pedal 3, instead of being track select, let's have that so that, I mean, there's so many options here. Look, you can current clear, undo, reverse. Let's make it so that it turns the loop effects on and off. And I'll just go back to that little jam and I'll turn that stutter on and off. So let's do that. I can also access the external control functions there. By default, we've got loop effects. I think that's pretty clever. And the memory increase or decrease. You can also alternatively attach an expression pedal and control things like one of the track volumes. It's really, really amazing. But the really cool thing is the assign function. So you can set up to, how many assigns do we have in here? We've got 8 assigns per memory location. So if we go in here, what you can do is say, let's turn assign 1 on, and then we can either assign it to one of these onboard pedals, or we can do this, which is really cool. Let's assign it to a MIDI CC. So I'm going to assign it to MIDI CC number 1. I'm going to go and then go back by pressing this button. I can set the source mode to be momentary or to be a toggle. Let's leave it as momentary. And then I can assign that to the thing that I want. So let's say I want to have MIDI CC number 1 just be the loop effects like we did before. So we can move over here till we find loop effects. While we're at it, let's set up a second assign to MIDI CC number 2 as well. And I mean, let's do something different with this. As you can see, there are so many different options in here. When you're playing around with those kits, maybe you want to have a section where you turn off part 2, the snare. So maybe you don't have the snare on in a verse, but you do have it on in a chorus. So let's find the corresponding part and assign that to MIDI CC number 2. And then you can see rhythm part number 2. We can set that to be any of the 4 parts, or we can have it as like engager fill, the play count, the record count, rhythm stop and start, the type of kit, the variation. We can have the rhythm pattern change. We can have the rhythm reverb, all assigned to these different MIDI CCs. But I want rhythm part 2 over there. So now with this, we've got the loop effects and we can turn that snare on and off. I'm going to hook up a MIDI controller. We'll use the same loop and I'll show you how this works in action. So I'm using my PolyFX Digit as a glorified MIDI controller. Foot switch A is sending MIDI CC number 1. Foot switch B is sending MIDI CC number 2. And I went ahead and assigned the rhythm on and off to foot switch C, which is sending MIDI assignment number 3. Let's just have a quick little play and see what we come up with. made it this far, well done. Hopefully I gave you an idea of just how flexible and powerful this unit is. Like I said, on the surface, it's a 2-track looper with some pretty good sounding built-in drum sounds. Once you get into that MIDI functionality though, and the fact that you can turn the drums on and off, you can change parts, you can bring in different sounds, you can basically use those glitch style effects, which I think sound really good and are actually really appropriate in this. And the fact that you can set the onboard buttons or the external buttons to pretty much do anything you like. Boss have hit a massive home run with this, and this thing is basically going to pay for itself in like 2 gigs for me. So this is going to make it onto my acoustic board because I have a lot of kind of acoustic duo style gigs coming up, and this is just such a no-brainer for me. So if you have any questions or there was anything that I didn't cover, please let me know in the comments. If you want to support the channel, there is links to my music and my Patreon in the video description. This unit was sent to me on loan by Boss, but I'm going to go and buy one. That's how much I like this thing. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.